This week's Torah portion is called Re'eh, and it's a continuation of Moses speaking to the Jewish people as they are poised to go into the land of Israel without him. He's teaching them everything they need to know as they are poised to go and start their new life, not in the desert, but now where they have to work for their food and they have to establish themselves in the promised land that God is giving them. And so we learn in this week's Torah portion, nestled in amongst everything else, where Moses is teaching them that they have free will, that we have the capacity to make choices. We can choose to do the right thing, we can choose to do the wrong thing in the moral domain, where Moses is telling the people that they should be besimcha, we should be joyous, always coupled with joyous before Hashem, that our joy comes from having a relationship with the divine, where we learn again about the laws of dietary laws, the kosher laws, what foods we can eat, how we shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk and we should spill out the blood, we don't need the blood, and so on, teaching us the laws of what animals we can eat and how to be kind to animals and how to have a sensitivity that to not cook a kid in its mother's milk, and so on and so on. But nestled in all of these things that Moses is teaching the Jewish people in this week's Torah portion is a teaching that I'd like to focus on. And the teaching is to not make a cut or to not make a bald spot when you are faced with death. When a loved one dies, don't self-mutilate, don't pull out your hair, don't cut yourself in the face of death. Now, many of the commentators speak about this, and they speak about this as being perhaps an injunction against excessive mourning. That mourning, when it's taken to an nth degree, when it stops us from living, when it leads us to be so angry and so bereft that we hurt ourselves or we cut ourselves, we pull our hair out, is something we shouldn't do. So I was reading a very interesting article by a woman called Dana Lerner, who is a licensed social worker, I believe, and she wrote an article in Psychotherapy Network about the grief that she felt when her 9-year-old son was killed in a traffic accident where a distracted driver hit him when he was crossing the road with her husband, and this little 9-year-old boy died. It was about 8.5 years ago, and she, as a psychotherapist, describes the trauma and the pain of losing her child. And she says it's a pain that you never get over. And I can attest to that, having lost my first child, a 4.5-month-old baby. You never get over the loss of your child. You never get over the loss of people that you are entwined with, that you love, that are part of your soul. You don't forget those people. You don't move on from those people. Those people are for always a part of you. And so I would like to suggest that as much as we are enjoined not to excessively grieve, that there is a grief that we persistently feel and endure and experience throughout all of our lives when we've lost people that we love. That this grief, says Dana Lerner, is a grief that she calls attachment grief. It's a grief that is because this person was a part of us, and now they're in another realm. Now they're not here with us, and we can't hold them. We're not in relationship with them in the way we were before, and it creates a trauma and a grief that lasts for our whole lives. We never end that grief. However, I think what the Torah is teaching us is that we also have to recognize that we have lives to live, and that our life is a gift that we have in this world to do something with. So I want to speak also about this concept of that the soul, after it leaves the body at death, that death is a separation of the soul from the body, that the soul goes up into the spiritual realm. So the soul never ends. Death is a misnomer for what happens to the soul. The soul sheds the garment that is the body and moves into a spiritual realm. It moves out of the physical confines of time and space and moves up into the spiritual world. The body, according to Jewish tradition, goes back into the ground from where it came. It goes back into the Adama, into the earth, from where it came. It's organic, it's material, it goes back into the earth. And it becomes one with the earth, just like a seed. If you put a seed into the ground and you try to dig it up, a few months later, it's probably all disintegrated. It's become one with the earth. But if you leave it there and you wait and you water it, then it will grow, and it will grow into a tree or whatever it will grow into. It'll grow, it'll sprout again, it'll become something new. So too, this separation of body and soul, according to our tradition, is temporary until the end of days, when there will be a time where there will be Tachiat Ametim, there will be a resurrection of the dead, there'll be a coming back together of the body that was planted into the ground that is now coming back as a rarefied, purified body with the purified soul that's been held in the Gan Eden or held in the spiritual worlds. They'll come back together and they'll bask in divine light for all of eternity, a time where there'll be no more death, a time where there'll be no more tears, that body and soul will come back together. So death, according to Jewish tradition, is temporary, a temporary separation of body and soul. However, for us, the living, we have lost our loved ones. They're not here, and we have pain, and we have this feeling, this wash of emotions that overwhelms us, and so on. And to say that grief at some point has to end, I think is not right. And again, what Dana Lona is teaching us is that there's an idea that attachment, grief is this grief because we are so attached to the people that we have lost that we remain attached to them for all of our lives. We carry them with us. They become part of who we are. And so too our Jewish tradition teaches us that we, the living, can affect the afterlife of those that have predeceased us. When we give tzedakah, when we give money for charity, when we do good deeds, when we learn Torah, when we visit the sick, fill in the blank, whatever it is that we do that's good in this world, or we do it because the person taught us those lessons, the lessons you learned from your mother, the lessons you learned from your friend, and we do those things because we learned them from those people get spiritual elevations, aliyahs in the heavens because of how we're acting in this world. It says that children are the feet for the parents who have predeceased, that we continue to walk in this world, we continue to walk in the ways of the people that have affected us, and not only do we perfect ourselves, but we help to move them up in the spiritual realm. So it's not actually true that there's nothing we can do and there's no contact that we have with the dead. It again goes back to this week's Torah portion. It says, Re'eh, see, I place before you. What do we see? We don't see that. We don't see the souls. We don't see the spirituality. We don't see it, but we know it's there. Just like we don't see the oneness of God, which is why in Shema we close our eyes to say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that God is one. We don't see it because the world it looks like it's so scattered and so multiplicitous, but it's not. It's all one. And so too, our soul continues on. Death is a misnomer. The soul doesn't die. The body goes into the ground, and there'll be this time when they'll come back together. So we, the living, continue to be in relationship with our loved ones. We continue to affect their afterlife. We continue this journey that is life, that we will all end at some point and we'll all die and move into the next world. It will happen to all of us. And this injunction that Moses is teaching the Jewish people not to self-mutilate in the face of death perhaps is a teaching of recognizing the truth of our tradition, which says that the soul continues on, that death is a temporary separation of body and soul and a temporary separation from us, from the dead, that there will be a reunification of everything in the end of days, and we'll all be one and it'll all be together and it'll all be good. But until that time, we live with separation, we live with grief. And the injunction is to not grieve excessively such that we hurt ourselves, or such that we deny this belief that there is a world beyond this one, there is an afterlife which is real, and to which our loved ones enter when they die. So death is temporary, and we mourn, and we suffer the loss of the people that we have loved the most. But to recognize that the soul is eternal, and that grief and self-harm shouldn't come together, that we should be able to somehow find a way to keep moving forward in the face of our losses. To mourn excessively perhaps means to hurt ourselves, or to self-mutilate ourselves, or to deny that there's another world beyond this one. But if we can hold these two realities together, then I think that's what Moses is teaching the Jewish people. Yes, there will be loss and grief and mourning when we lose our loved ones. And yes, we have to keep on living, and we have to keep on functioning, and we have to somehow take the person we've lost with us into our new reality without them, and function in this world in a way that brings an aliyah to them in the heavenly realms, and also helps us to improve who we are in this world.